The thunder cracked like a whip across the sky as Kael tightened the last bolt on the broken cooling unit. Rain hammered the tin roof of his workshop, drowning out everything except the storm and his own thoughts. He was alone, always alone. His own people had abandoned him when he chose to settle on this human colony world, calling him a traitor for preferring their company to his own kind. The humans tolerated him, but tolerance wasn't friendship. At 40 cycles old, he'd made peace with solitude, or so he told himself. The explosion came without warning. A flash of white light turned night into day, followed by a boom that rattled every tool on his walls. Kael dropped his wrench and ran to the window. Through the sheets of rain, he saw flames erupting from his scrapyard, orange and furious against the darkness. Something had crashed. Something big. He grabbed his emergency kit and sprinted into the storm. The wreckage was still burning when he reached it, twisted metal glowing red-hot despite the downpour. It was a small craft, barely larger than a personal shuttle, torn apart on impact. The cockpit had split open like a cracked egg. Kael's breath caught in his throat when he saw her. She was Valorian, like him, her blue-gray skin already losing its luster. Blood pooled beneath her broken body, mixing with rainwater and oil. But it wasn't her that made Kael freeze. It was the tiny creature clutched against her chest, barely the size of his forearm, covered in translucent scales that shimmered even in the firelight. A Draconid. Impossible. They were extinct. Everyone knew that. The woman's eyes fluttered open, fixing on Kael with desperate intensity. Her hand shot out, gripping his wrist with surprising strength. "Please," she gasped, her voice barely audible over the rain. "They're coming. They'll kill her." "Weaponize her? Promise me." Kael stared at the hatchling. It mewled softly, a sound like crystal chimes, and opened eyes the color of molten gold. "Who's coming?" "Why, the Crimson Syndicate. They want the last of her kind. I stole her from their laboratory." Blood bubbled at the corner of her mouth. "I'm dying. She just hatched an hour ago. She needs warmth. Needs safety, please. I saw your shop. You live with humans. They won't look for her with a Valorian among humans. Please." The hatchling chirped again, and something in Kael's chest twisted. He'd been alone so long. He'd forgotten what it felt like to be needed. "I promise," he whispered. The woman smiled, relief washing over her face. Her name. Call her Ember. Then her eyes went still, staring up at nothing as the rain washed away her tears. Kael carefully pried the hatchling from her mother's arms. Ember trembled against his chest, cold and terrified. He tucked her inside his jacket, feeling her tiny heart racing like a frightened bird's. Behind him, the flames were dying in the rain. He had to move. If the syndicate was really coming, he had minutes at best. He ran back to his workshop, his mind racing faster than his feet. The Crimson Syndicate. He'd heard stories. They dealt in weapons, slaves, and worse. If they wanted a Draconid, it was because the old legends were true. Draconids could generate heat intense enough to melt starship hulls, could bond telepathically with other species, could grow from hatchling to full size in mere months. In the wrong hands, a Draconid was a living weapon of mass destruction. In his hands, she was just a scared baby who'd lost her mother. Kael cleared his main workbench with one sweep of his arm, sending tools clattering to the floor. He grabbed heat lamps, blankets, and a food synthesizer he'd been meaning to repair. Ember watched him with those golden eyes, intelligent and aware in a way that made his skin prickle. She understood. Somehow, she understood everything. He fashioned a nest from thermal blankets and positioned the heat lamps around it. When he placed Ember inside, she curled into a tight ball, her scales beginning to glow faintly with internal warmth. Good. She was responding to the heat. He programmed the synthesizer for protein paste, the kind used for newborn livestock. It wasn't ideal, but it would keep her alive. The door to his shop burst open. Kael spun, hard hammering, but it was only Maya, his neighbor from 3 lots down. The human woman was drenched, her dark hair plastered to her face. "I saw the crash," she panted. "Are you okay? I saw you running." She stopped, her eyes widening as she spotted Ember in the makeshift nest. "Maya, you need to leave." "Is that?" She stepped closer, her fear giving way to wonder. Is that a Draconid? I thought they were extinct. They are. Or they're supposed to be. Her mother died in that crash, and very bad people are coming to take her. Kael positioned himself between Maya and Ember. You need to forget you saw this. Forget you were here. Maya met his eyes, and Kael saw something he hadn't expected. Determination. How can I help? Those 4 words changed everything. For the first time in years, Kael wasn't alone. Over the next 3 days, they worked in secret. Maya brought supplies under cover of darkness. Food, medical equipment, materials Kael could use to reinforce his workshop. She spread word among the human colonists that Kael was working on a sensitive repair job and needed privacy. Most people left him alone anyway, but Maya made sure of it. Ember grew impossibly fast. By the 2nd day, she was the size of a large dog, her scales hardening into overlapping plates of crimson and gold. By the 3rd day, she could walk on her hind legs, and her tail could wrap around Kael's waist. And a bond had formed. It happened without warning. Kael had been feeding her when suddenly her thoughts flooded his mind. Not words exactly, but emotions, and images so vivid they felt real. Warmth, safety, gratitude, love. She'd imprinted on him the way hatchlings were supposed to imprint on their parents. He was her family now. He felt her fear too, because she could sense what was coming before he did. They arrived on the 4th day, 3 ships, sleek and black, descending through the afternoon sky like birds of prey. They landed in the street outside Kael's workshop, and armed figures in crimson armor poured out, 20 of them, maybe more. Kael activated the defenses he'd spent the last 3 days building. Magnetic barriers hummed to life around his shop. Automated turrets, cobbled together from salvaged parts, tracked the approaching figures. It wouldn't be enough. He knew that, but he'd promised a dying mother he would protect her child. The lead enforcer activated a loudspeaker. Kael of Valora, we know you have the Draconid. Surrender it now, and you'll live. Resist, and we'll tear your workshop apart with you inside it. Kael didn't answer. Behind him, Ember growled, a sound like grinding stone. She was crouched low, her golden eyes blazing with fury. He felt her thoughts. Protect, fight, kill. She was still just a hatchling, but she was ready to die for him, just as he was ready to die for her. The enforcers raised their weapons. Kael braced himself for the end. Then the colonists came. They emerged from workshops and homes, from alleys and streets, dozens of them. Humans, most of them, but a few other species too. They carried tools, makeshift weapons, whatever they could find. Maya stood at the front, holding a plasma cutter like a sword. You want to get to Kael? She shouted at the enforcers. You go through all of us. The lead enforcer laughed. Stupid humans. You'd die for a Valorian? For a creature you don't even understand? An old human man stepped forward, his weathered face set in grim determination. We understand courage. We understand a man who risks everything to save a child. That's more than you bastards will ever understand. The enforcers opened fire. The colonists scattered, returning fire with whatever they had. Kael's turrets blazed to life, cutting down 3 enforcers before they could adapt. The magnetic barriers held for precious seconds, giving the colonists time to find cover. But there were too many enforcers, too well armed. Kael felt the barriers failing, felt the walls of his workshop buckling under sustained fire. This was it. He turned to Ember, placing his hand on her scaled head. I'm sorry, he whispered. I tried. Ember looked at him with those impossibly wise eyes. Then she threw back her head and screamed. The sound shattered windows 3 blocks away. The temperature in the workshop spiked so fast that Kael's skin blistered. Ember's scales erupted with light, brilliant and blinding. She was glowing like a star, heat radiating from her body in waves that turned the air to shimmer. She'd awakened. She launched herself through the workshop wall, tearing through metal like paper. The enforcers turned their weapons on her, but their bullets melted before they touched her scales. She moved like living fire, faster than anything that size should move. Her claws were molten metal. Her breath was a furnace that turned armor to slag. The enforcers broke. The ones who could still run fled to their ships. Ember pursued them, her roar shaking the ground. She tore into the nearest ship, ripping through its hull. The others lifted off in panic, engines screaming. Ember stood in the wreckage, flames dancing around her body, and watched them flee. Then she turned back to Kael, the light fading from her scales. She walked to him slowly, carefully, and pressed her massive head against his chest. He felt her exhaustion, her relief, her love. Around them, the colonists emerged from cover. They stared at Ember in awe and fear, but no one ran. Maya approached cautiously, then reached out to touch Ember's scales. The Draconid allowed it, rumbling softly. "I think," Maya said, a smile spreading across her soot-stained face, "you're going to need a bigger workshop." Kael laughed, the sound foreign to his own ears. When was the last time he'd laughed? He looked around at the humans, at Maya, at the ruins of his workshop, at Ember, his family, his impossible, ridiculous, wonderful family. "Yeah," he said, scratching behind Ember's ear ridge. "I think you're right. The syndicate would come back eventually. He knew that. But when they did, they wouldn't find a hopeless alien alone in his workshop. They'd find a community. They'd find courage. They'd find humanity at its finest, standing shoulder to shoulder with anyone brave enough to do the right thing. And they'd find a fully grown Draconid with a very protective attitude toward her father." Kael looked up at the sky, where the syndicate ships had vanished into the clouds, and smiled. Let them come. He wasn't alone anymore. He would never be alone again.